we did the River Valley civilizations, which is really the kind of the first part of all major history topics. So you have to understand those 4 groups that we focused on are going to be reoccurring. Like different groups are going to go into those different areas throughout the course. All right. So it's really important to understand kind of the geographic features of that area because it's going to play a major role throughout the year, really. But we'll learn about different groups as well, and even the fact that with interactions with other territories, they start to develop even new types of religions, new types of ideas that are really going to play a major role in the history, okay? So if you take a look on Schoology, and I'll show you my board, so just in case we're all on the same page here. All right, just click this. So when you look at our Schoology page, and I'll show you here in a second, there is now a brand new folder, right? Okay, this is chapter 3. That's what we're on now, all right? Chapter 3. So you don't have to worry about these 2 anymore. Obviously, if you are missing like a homework assignment or something, you can go back to those homework assignments and post missing things, and I will get notified and I can fix the grade, okay? But we'll be focused on chapter 3. Today, we'll be doing Indo Europeans, which is the first section of the new chapter, right? And basically, Indo Europeans are going to be a group of basically a group of people from Europe that kind of transfer into all different areas of the world that are going to each have their own culture, okay? But if you're looking at what our PowerPoint will be, it's chapter 3, right? So it's right here. It has a PPTX, which is the PowerPoint. So a few things that might help you out, right? And I know for extra credit, I have you guys do notes to me. Now understand, when you send notes, they actually have to be thorough notes. Not saying that, because I give a lot of credit to people that do a lot of work, and I've seen people do Quizlets that are really long and notes that are long, which is great. That will help you tremendously, right? But I can't grant you extra credit unless the notes are thorough, as in they're going to help you study for the quiz or test that we have, right? And I know everyone studies differently. Everyone has their own method of learning, and that's great. My only issue is I can't accept things that aren't, like for instance, if you have like a few questions, right? It's not going to help you tremendously for the quiz. Like the quiz is made up of a lot of material. So having a few questions may not necessarily help you, which means you can't receive the extra credit. It has to be something that's going to help organize all the information that we've done, okay? So just to give you a heads up, that's what I'm looking for extra credit. If you're submitting notes to you. Bless you. All right. So when it comes to how you should take notes, there's a few ways you can do that, right? If you were to download this PowerPoint, right? Let's just say you download the PowerPoint, and I'll show you, this is what it looks like. At the bottom of every slide, there's this thing that says notes. You click the notes thing, and you can actually type in notes at the very bottom of the PowerPoint, right? When you do that, and then all of a sudden you want to, let's just say you want to print, you can print this into into notes, where it has basically your notes that you typed out would show up right over here. That's how technically it's supposed to work. So if you type notes on the bottom, it should show your notes here. All right. If not, there's a different way you're doing it where it has notes page where the notes will show up underneath it. If you were to take your notes like that and you submit it, that's perfectly fine. If you do Quizlet, that's perfectly fine, but it has to be thorough. It can't be like three index cards and you say, all right, that's it. No, it has to be thorough enough. If you take notes on paper, that's fine. It just has to be thorough and actually help you. Take it on Word, same thing. OneNote, same thing. And there's like hundreds of different ways to take notes. But I'm just giving you an example of one way you could take notes if you're still confused on the best method. Because if you're taking notes from here, then you're looking at the slide itself and you're taking notes based on extra things that are being said. Okay? So those are all ways you can take notes that can help you when it comes to submitting something to me for extra credit or just helping you study. All right? Any questions on that before we start? All good? All right. So we're starting chapter 3 today. All right, and basically the premise of chapter 3 is that there's going to be new groups emerging, right, as we progress through time, right? And the Indo Europeans are going to be that group that kind of starts off in the Caucasus Mountains, which is by the Aegean and Black Seas, and they're going to spread throughout Europe and Asia. And these groups are each going to have their own separate cultures, their own separate ideas, and their interactions with one another are going to basically start new religions that are going to be key to even modern religions today, right? So I gave you a little bit of timeline to start off with, and this timeline is pretty broad. It actually divides it into the Eastern Hemisphere and Western Hemisphere, and you don't have to memorize the timeline. This is just going to help you understand how certain events are happening at the same time, and sometimes it's difficult when you're doing lessons to really show really the context of what's happening around the world, right? Because even a lot of other topics we learned about before, like the River Valley civilizations, some of them were interacting with one another at same points in time. Like for instance, the Sumerians, which were the first farming civilization, right? That was the Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia. They were interacting with the Indus River Valley, and even though it's hard to really understand that when we're doing a PowerPoint, we're doing one group and another group and another group. A lot of these interactions are happening at the same time with one another. But we all and that's what's really important, is because if one group's interacting with another group, that's what we call cultural diffusion, where ideas, cultures interact with one another and they start to meld a little bit more. Okay. So there's 4 sections, right, that we're going to be focusing on. Right. Section 1 is going to be about the Indo Europeans, which is what we're doing today. Section 2, which is going to be focused on Hinduism and Buddhism, which will take probably kind of like a 2-day thing, right? Because it has a lot of material in here. Section 3 is a seafaring trader, so this is going to be kind of the origin of even the Greek civilizations, right? Because it's going to be the Minoans and the Phoenicians, which are really within the Mediterranean Sea complex, which is like that area within the Mediterranean Sea, close to Greece and Italy and all that. And they have a lot of trading interactions with other groups, which kind of start the Greeks, right? And then we're going to start the origins of Judaism, right? And these are all going to be important leading into the next chapter that's going to go more into these larger civilizations, right? So one of the first things I want to start off with is kind of give you a do now scenario, right? So I'll read this first part to you, all right? And then what we'll do is I'll ask you guys to kind of talk with one another to discuss what you would, it goes along with the do now, and I'll explain. So I'll read the first part. So the big question is why might you leave your homeland, right? In each one of us, all our ancestors had left their homeland at some point. Okay, unless you're a Native American where your family was born in America, every one of us as an ancestor was an immigrant. Okay, and they left their homeland to come to America at some point. Okay, now. The big question is going to be, why might someone want to leave their homeland? And I'll read this first part so we get started. When your family, along with many others, decided to leave its homeland, you wondered whether you should go. It was hard to leave the land you loved, yet life there was becoming increasingly difficult. As your community grew larger, grazing for its many animals had become scarce, and lately there have been rumors of coming invaders. You have been walking and riding for days, now you wonder whether you should have stayed. Will you find a new homeland, a better place in which to live? Will you survive the journey, or will you welcome in a new land? So the question, I kind of pose 2 different aspects. This one's talking about if you're living during that time period, and the other question I posed was thinking from your ancestors' point of view, leaving your homeland to do something else. The question is, why would you leave your homeland? Why would you leave, especially even back then, why would you leave your territory? Yeah, Aiden. So say it again? There's better stuff there, but you don't know. How do you know there's better stuff there? Well, let's just say back then. How do you do research? There's no computers or it's possible, right? Word of mouth. What? So the better yourself. You're saying there's better stuff there, right? Is there a fear of leaving your place you live in now? Why? Yeah, you're going to a place that's completely new, right? And that's why I posed the question about, do you know anything about that place? Because sometimes you don't have no idea what is over there. And you're just leaving with the belief there's something there. Yeah. Yeah, so you're looking at it as in where I'm living right now is really, really bad, right? And it can only be better somewhere else than it is right now. So sometimes people want to leave because of that reason. Let's now even look at more modern times, right? We're talking about our ancestors. If you know about your family tree, right, and where your family is from, and what time they came to America and everything, it might be easier for you to understand. For instance, my grandparents were living in Italy. They were kids during World War II. So they had left. My grandfather first come to America when it was in the 50s, right? It came first in the 50s. And he wanted to leave because Europe was still going through a lot of craziness, right? So he had come to America. He only had $20 to his name because that was one of the kind of the criteria. He was one of the last groups of Americans or really Italians to come through Ellis Island in New York City. Okay, and his name is still attached to the stone. If you've ever been to Ellis Island before, you'd have all the immigrants that have come through that port, and his name is still there. He only had $20 to his name, right? And that was one of the criteria you need to have in order to come to America. And you had to have some sort of a trade, right? What like a job you had to do, right? So he was a barber, okay? And he had recommendations from a lot of there was a famous actor in Italy that had wrote him a recommendation because he cut his hair. He used to be his barber for him. So he gave him a recommendation, came to America, had his own barber shop, and was working there for a time until my grandmother and my aunt, my dad were in America, okay? So he left because there was a lot of issues going on, especially there was, it was just after World War II. So a lot of people were nervous about the economy, whether there'll be more conflict down the line, and they left to try to better themselves in America. Now, it's different modern times because, like Aiden has said, you can kind of research or you can look into more information about where you're going. But back then, it's unknown, right? You guys will learn about in U.S. history in your juniors that the colonists that went to America had no idea what they were going to. The only thing they knew was that there was work available. So they said, yeah, there is labor, there is farming that we can go do in America. And that was it. They didn't say how the climate was over there. They didn't say what they'll find when they get there. All that they were known was they were promised that there is work, right? And you might get freedom from religious persecution. They looked at their current situation like, yeah, no, I want to get out of there and go somewhere new. Even though it was scary to think that you're living out in a brand new place you've never heard of or even knew what it was like, okay? So that kind of goes along with what we're talking about today, right? So to kind of give you guys a setting the stage or kind of some background here, we already talked about how in different areas, right, and especially in Mesopotamia, in the Indus River Valley, they had basically a fertile land that could be grown, right? And we'll talk more about specifically how certain groups that went to the areas we've talked about already, especially the Indus River Valley, right? Remember that was already kind of decaying off because of natural disasters, especially with the monsoons and earthquakes. And we start to see even groups start to kind of take over those areas. Now, these areas, right, that were flush with farming had attracted nomadic tribes. We talked about the Mesopotamians, right? They were basically being taken over by nomadic groups every other day, okay? And the reason why was because they were rich with goods and rich with fertile soil. Same thing happened with the Indus River Valley. So people had left their homelands to kind of go into these new environments that were really prospering, right? When they hear about civilizations, right, these massive civilizations, you hear about the Indus River Valley, they got sewage systems, they have private toilets. That's amazing, right? I want to go there. So that's what they do. They go to those areas and they end up living there permanently, right? So you take a look at what Indo Europeans were. As I mentioned already, Indo Europeans were nomadic groups that had, it wasn't like they were just barbarians, right? They had developed their own sense of culture, but not to the same extent in which these civilizations had, right? But they were excellent at basically being nomads in which creating technology to help them do what they normally do, which is move from place to place. So they're really good at, they tamed horses, they rode chariots, all right? And it helped them move from place to place a lot easier than ever before. Now, when you're looking at Indo-Europeans, there are a lot of different groups of Indo-Europeans. It's not just one group, right? There's many of them. So when you take a look at this map here, so Indo-Europeans start in this area here, right? And this is the Caucasus Mountains between the Black and Caspian Sea, right? So right in these areas here. Now, the Indo-Europeans migrate into all different directions. And as you can see here, right, these different names of these groups are Indo-European groups that started out in this one area, the Caucasus Mountains, and then migrated to a bunch of different areas, right? So let's see, they went all over the place, okay? Now, when it comes to language, these Indo-Europeans had their own language. Now, what's interesting about them is that their language ends up becoming kind of the starting point for a lot of major languages that are modern, right? That's why we look at the Indo-Europeans kind of are the origins of English, the origins of German, Spanish, Persian. They all kind of start with similar traits, right? And because they go to different areas and they start to intermingle with different groups, that's how the language changes or adapts, right? So for instance, Indo-European group goes into the Indus River Valley. Those people that were in the Indus River Valley already had language and written culture, but then now they are mixed with Indo-Europeans, and that now changes completely, right? It's melded together. And that's how you start to get more modern languages today, is because now they have these different groups are interacting, and they start changing the groups depending on which group went where, okay? So there is not really a specific reason why they look at why this mass migration happened. Generally, people point to that there was a lack of natural resources. They probably ran out of the water systems of the area, weren't really being beneficial to them. There might have been natural disasters. But one thing we do know is that a lot of Indo-European groups had migrated from the 17 to 1200 BC time period that frame into all these different groups that we know of today. Okay? So here's just another map of showing you kind of the time periods that we see that these migrations occur. But this is the general area here in which the Caucasus Mountains where the Indo-Europeans had started, and they migrate into different areas. All right. So one of the first groups of Indo-Europeans we'll talk about is the Hittite Empire, right? The Hittites are very, very good at kind of developing weaponry or even chariots to help them conquer different groups. They are a very nomadic, very good in warfare, and they had taken over what modern day Turkey is, which is also known as Anatolia. And around 2000 BC, they took over this area. Now, they combine all the different city-states of that area to combine it into one larger unified force and make it into an empire. All right. And they kind of dominate this area for a long period of time. They end up taking over the Babylonians, right? Remember we talked about the Babylonians with Kota Hammurabi? Now they do return in strength again, the Babylonians, but they do control Babylon, and they even start to get to the point where they try to expand into Egypt, and it doesn't get, they kind of have a stalemate with the Egyptians, right? Egypt kind of gets conquered by a different group a little bit later on, but they do expand the territory quite a lot. Now, what's interesting about the Hittites is they end up kind of adapting into different groups. Just like how I mentioned before with Indo-Europeans, we see a trend, right? They kind of borrow a lot of the ideas of already the Mesopotamian culture, right? The Babylonians and even of what the Sumerians were already like. Remember when they're a nomadic group, they tried to kind of take over the culture and kind of make it their own. Remember how we learned about Sargon had taken over the Sumerian culture because he didn't really have one of his own? The same thing happens here. The Hittites end up adapting the culture that was already there and end up melding it into their own version, okay? What they excel at, as I mentioned, is chariot and iron technology, which allows them to create really good weaponry of the time. So when you take a look at what they excel at most, it's war, right? And that's why they dominated an area for 450 years. When you excel at war, there's not going to be another group that can beat you, right? Especially if your technology is better than everyone else's at the time, right? So they excel at war, and even their technology allows them to trade with other groups, which allows them to now interact with all different types of cultures, right? Now, for a time, as I mentioned, they dominated the area, but they do fall around 1190 BC after attacks from different tribes that were very similar to them, right? Nomadic tribes. Now we take a look at a different Indo-European group, the Aryans, right? So the last group went around Mesopotamia. This group is now going into India, the Indus River Valley. So the Aryans are another group of Indo Europeans, and they go into the Indus River Valley around 1500 BC. Now, there's not a lot of artifacts left behind from the Aryans, but there's one thing that is left behind that we found was known as a secret writing known as the Vedas. Right? Now, the Vedas is going to give us a lot of information about their culture, and the Vedas actually outlines the caste system. Right? It creates one of the most famous social pyramid structures that we know of today, known as the caste system. We'll get into that. But the Vedas also intertwines a lot of the traditions, the rituals, the beliefs of this Indo-European group when they are combined with the Indus River Valley. Okay? So, as I mentioned, probably the most famous thing that comes from this group is the caste system itself. And you should definitely know the caste system, right? This is going to be probably one of the most important things you would need to know for this. Because the caste system is going to have a lot of impacts, not just now, but thousands of years of impacts, the caste system. Even today, it still has an impact on India, okay? So when you take a look at the caste system, it's a very strict social class system, very, very rigid. Whenever you hear a rigid class system, it means you can't move up the class system. Very difficult to move up, right? And it's broken down into 4 groups, all right? The first group is the Brahmins, right? And these are the priests. These are the religious rulers, the people that probably have they have the most influence because they're closest to gods, right? Not saying that they're gods themselves, but they're closest to the gods, right? Next is we have the Krishas, which are the kings and warriors. So these would be considered obviously the protectors of society, right? Those that are soldiers would be considered high class, all right? Obviously, the kings would be up there. That's just quite obvious, but it's really the soldiers that are defending the people and keeping order are considered high class. Then we have the Vaishyas, which are the landowners or traders. So these are people that had a specific trade. And remember, the Indus River Valley was really big on trade because of their location. So the same thing happened when the Aryans had taken over. The traders were seen as a higher class than, they're not the high class, but they're higher than the lower classes. Then you have the Shrutas, which are basically those that were working in the fields, the peasants, the farmers, okay? And then what they created was even a class below them that was separate from the entire caste system. And these were known as the untouchables. All right? And you guys will watch a video about the untouchables. But basically, untouchables were, quite simple, people that were separate from society. Right? These are people that were doing the jobs that no one wanted to do. Like they were the grave diggers. Okay? They were the people that cleaned basically the sewers. These are jobs that literally no one wanted, right? And when you hold that job, you are shunned from society. And even today, that if you lived in India, if your family was a untouchable, even today's modern society, your family is shunned like you were an untouchable. Even though technically, by law, they got rid of the caste system, it's still mentally in play. It still happens. So you look at the impacts of this, it has a lot of impacts, all right? Because now it's separating people into separate social structures, and they can't leave there for life. And I'll talk about when we talk about Hinduism, it's only going to make it more strict, all right? But the basic premise of this is that if you're born to a certain class, even if you literally had no choice in the matter, you can't leave. Right? Let's just say your parents are an untouchable. Guess what? What are you going to be for life? Untouchable. Even if you may be really, really smart, be really, really talented, you are untouchable for life. There's no way you live in that. Right? And that is a big problem, right? Because you see that a lot of times. Okay? So let's watch this quick little video about the caste system and even like the modern impacts of this. Move down? You could. Right? If something happens to, let's just say, your business, right? You lose all your money, and now your only job is to basically clean the sewers. You're untouchable, right? You can lose. Now, the difficulty of rising it is a lot harder than dropping. You know what I mean? Because a lot of times they always try to keep the same people in power, like especially when it comes to family ties and money. And that's even just in the past. In the modern times, it's probably more, there's a better chance you moving up in society because just if opportunity presents itself. Like, for instance, anyone ever see Slumdog Millionaire? Anyone ever seen the movie Slumdog Millionaire? No one here has ever seen the movie Slumdog Millionaire. That's a great movie. I'm surprised no one's ever seen that one. It's actually a true story. This boy was an untouchable, right? He was basically a kid that had lost his parents, and he was taken in by basically this gangster that was using these kids to try to beg for money, to be beggars on the street and take money from people and then bring it back to the person who was a gangster that ruled the area, right? Now, the whole story, I'm not going to go over the whole story, but basically he ends up getting access to the show. You know, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? That show. You answer questions, and if you answer all the questions, you become a millionaire, right? He gets access to that show. He gets on the show. And throughout his life, he started like reading up on a lot of different facts and stuff where he wins the millionaire. He was the first person to win in India. And he ends up becoming an instant slumdog person that was untouchable to a millionaire. In one night. The whole movie goes into his life, basically. And it's really interesting. It's a really famous movie. That's why I was surprised no one's seen it before. But so let's watch this little video clip about the caste system and how it's still interacting today.
Is growing and changing fast, but some traditional views are still in place. Institutions like the caste system have been outlawed, yet caste discrimination and segregation still occurs. The most recent economic data indicated in urban areas a wealth gap of 60% exists between people traditionally from the highest and lowest caste. So what is the Indian caste system, and how is it affecting modern India? Well, the caste system is a hereditary social hierarchy, also called the jati system, that's existed in India for nearly 2,000 years. Historians think that these social distinctions may be based in ancient Hinduism, which delineates 4 major social classes, or varnas. On top are the Brahmin, usually described as priests and scholars. Then come the Kshatriya, described as nobles and warriors. The Vaisya, below them operate commercial businesses. And then the Sudra, below them are referred to as laborers or servants. Then there is a 5th group completely ostracized from traditional Indian society, the untouchables, now called the Dalits. This is the lowest caste and is relegated to undesirable jobs like cleaning sewers. Because they are considered impure, the Dalits have been regularly segregated from schools and religious temples, and there are reports that some have even been punished for letting their shadow fall on someone of a higher caste. Experts think that this hierarchy wasn't strictly adhered to in the region until the British claimed India as a colony and wrote the caste system into their laws. From there, the system became more rigid, and when India gained independence from Britain in 1947, it was ingrained into the culture. Obviously, the Dalits got the short end of the stick in this historical arrangement. But in 1955, discrimination based on caste was outlawed. And to help reintegrate lower castes into modern society, the government later implemented affirmative action like quotas for certain jobs and university admissions. However, vestiges of the caste hierarchy undoubtedly remain. A politician's caste continues to be an important deciding factor for many voters, and marrying or acting outside of one's caste continues to be taboo in many rural areas. For India to become completely caste-free, more education, government policies, and social programs may be needed. Although this social system is still rooted deep in India, it does have cracks. To hear the inspiring story of one young boy who beat the system, check out this video from This Happened Here.
Okay, so to kind of give a sense here, caste still do play a major role. Like he talked about, even government officials, their caste does play a major role in who gets voted for, right? Even though they outlaw the whole caste system, it's such ingrained into the culture that it still plays a major issue today, okay?
One evening,
Okay. So with the Aryan kingdoms now really having a stronghold within India, right, we start to see even a domination on all fronts, as in they start to even have separations of smaller kingdoms within that same group of the Aryans, right? The Aryans step in, they create this certain type of culture, right, especially depending on the caste system, and we start to even see even certain settlements or even smaller kingdoms start to combine to be formed based on the Aryans. Now, the interesting thing is that these smaller kingdoms end up uniting by 100 BC, right? Now, just like we've seen with the Warring States period, when people are divided into separate kingdoms, okay, there's still going to be conflict with one another, and as in who is more power than somebody else. And before they united, they did have a lot of issues and a lot of warring times within India too. This conflict, this violence that had occurred, had caused a lot of people to question their current religion. And you're going to see this a lot. When a lot of people are dying, you always see people say, they question the religion of the time or question the authority of the time and say, is this really working? Okay? And this is what's really going to be important. Because of this questioning of religion, the current religion, new religions are going to be created. And just to give you a quick little hint here, one of the new religions created is going to be Hinduism. Right? And this leads to what we'll learn about next time. Right? But with that being said, let's jump into our worksheet for today. So if you look at Schoology, there's going to be a worksheet that's called 3.1 Study Guide. Right? It's going to focus on the Indo Europeans. So let's bring that out now.